This is a Beyond Barriers Unscripted podcast.
It's the most important thing, I think.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Randy Owen. Today's guest is a former co-worker of mine at Society for the Blind. His name is Aser Tolentino. Aser is an attorney at law as well as a content creator on YouTube and does a podcast called The Redacted Files. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you everybody for listening. Please remember to hit that subscribe button. If you got a friend that you think might enjoy the show, go ahead and share it with them. Also, if you have any feedback, comments, or questions, perhaps you have a suggestion for a potential guest on the show, you can contact me at bb.unscripted@gmail.com. And now, my conversation with Aser. When I first came to work at Society, you were I always called you the tech guru. You were my answer guy. You were always doing research. What is your secret to staying focused and staying on task? You worked with me long enough to know that I kind of bounce.
I think the important thing when you have a lot of tasks in front of you is to always be mindful of what tasks need doing in the moment. If there's something that you get assigned that isn't due for a couple weeks, then, keep it on the radar. But just because it came from someone very senior or is something that could be a really big deal, it doesn't mean that you can drop the thing that you're working on at this very second, because you need to make sure that that gets done. Ultimately, then you'll be able to focus on the other things more effectively. At the same time, you just always need to be looking at your time and what you are able to handle. And I think the thing that I always had the most trouble doing was looking someone in the eye, metaphorically speaking, and saying, no, I can't do that.
Yeah, that's hard sometimes.
But that's the key to really effectively executing on the tasks that you're assigned, is knowing your limits and understanding that there will come a point where no matter how good you are at juggling multiple tasks, eventually one of those balls is going to fall out of the air and you're not going to catch it.
Do you ever, what's your motive for saying or for feeling like you need to say no to something? Is it just something that you can't do right now? Is there ever any ego involved with that?
Sometimes it is literally, I do not have the time or the bandwidth to take on this task right now. Sometimes it is the literal knowledge that I know of someone who could do this job better. And I think that that's one thing that was hammered into me when learning legal ethics, was that you need to be able to not only ethically do your job and diligently do your job, but you need to be able to competently do your job. And if there's somebody who can do a job better, then they should be the one doing it.
Can you go back and talk about law school and that time in your life and what was going on?
So when I was going to law school, I still had some modicum of usable vision. And that's always one of the interesting metrics when you're working with someone who has low vision, is how much usable vision do they have. In my particular case, if I increased font to about 20 point or so and inverted contrast, then I could work for a standard work day, handling documents and performing assignments.
Could you keep up with that much magnification? Because you're constantly having to scroll the screen.
Yes, that was one of the challenges. Most of the time I was using a 19-inch display or 17-inch laptop. And, it really is one of those cases where, in retrospect, you go, wow, that was probably not the best use of my remaining vision. But it's something that I'm sure you've experienced on more than one occasion with clients who will use whatever vision is left long after it's actually tenable or even sustainable. So that was actually an issue I had when ultimately I lost what remaining vision I had when I was practicing with the district attorney's office, was that I eventually hit that inflection point where the amount of time I could spend at that level of magnification did not permit me to complete work in a reasonable time. So that led to first an attempt to obtain a medical remedy and then ultimately a transition to using screen readers full time.
So you go through law school, and how did you come to Society for the Blind?
So as an employee, I came through the wonderful process that I think really empowers our students, or society students now, I guess. I can't really call myself. The issue, the magic of the formula that lets society's students really feel the potential of the training they're receiving and the transformative nature of the core skills is that all of their instructors receive the same training, and a lot of them went through the exact same program. And, if I say so myself, took the lessons learned in how well the program worked for them and transition that into improvements to the way we do things. And I think that is a process of evolution that makes the instruction that society delivers extremely adaptive and current to the needs of the students as they prepare for work. Yeah, and so that's what I did is I volunteered, and then by demonstrating an ability to work with students one-on-one, when a vacancy in the faculty appeared, then I got to interview for it. And I think that was a tremendous opportunity. And I think that that's something that is particularly valuable, that transitional opportunity of volunteering for a job that you want more exposure to and want to try out if you have an opportunity. And I think, when you're in vocational rehabilitation, that is a unique opportunity to pursue that kind of internship or volunteer position, and then demonstrate your abilities. Because, let's face it, when you're someone with a disability, you have a harder argument to make to demonstrate your ability to perform the job regardless of the employer.
Gotcha. Can you talk about knowing your worth?
So I think that I have a reasonably good appreciation of my skills, my knowledge, and experience. But part of that really comes to when you really get down to it, the most important part of having that confidence in your ability is clearly defining then the things that you are not confident about. And I fully expect that on a couple of very specific topics, I will know more than the average user or person on the street. However, it's always the case that there is something I don't know, because the world we live in is constantly changing. And that's something that 2020 will have taught us all over and over and over again. But at the same time, my experience isn't universal. And I think that my upbringing helped establish that very early on, that the same solutions, the same frameworks that explain or solve or contextualize people's experiences will not always line up with your learned experience. So you always need to be open to hearing other points of view and receiving information that can adjust what you know to be true. Because in a lot of situations, a lot of these things are not objective truths. So, it could be the case that a given piece of assistive technology, for example, is technically speaking the best, the fastest, or the commonly accepted solution for a given set of accessibility challenges. However, for a particular user, that might not be the case. And so that's something we always have to be mindful of.
One of the other things I remember that happened while we were co-workers was you got married. Can you talk about marriage and how you met your wife, and you and Megan, if it's okay, I mentioned her name. You guys always seemed like a really good partnership.
So we had a relationship that matured in a very modern sense, as in we met on Twitter, of all places, and began communicating purely through text, and then speaking to one another on Google Hangouts. I think it was the platform of choice to start off with. And we had a lot of common interests to begin with. And as we explored those together, it turns out we had more and more in common. So by the time that we met, I think we had established a rapport based on a lot of common experiences. And then with that established, it was a matter of learning about all of the things we could teach each other, which has been one of the more rewarding parts of building a life together.
Would you say that having just a friendship is important?
It's the most important thing, I think. Having so much in common and having that deep trust is something that forms a bond that is really transcendent.
You're working from home now, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you compare and contrast? I know in your current job you probably haven't traveled much, but compare and contrast, or give me something that was maybe an unexpected positive working remotely, and then maybe something that you didn't foresee coming up and have had to deal with.
So I think one of the benefits to working from home is that the environment is, well, to the extent it ever can be, completely under your control. And I think that has been extremely beneficial. You know, I remember one of the long running, I guess it rises to the level of gag at society, was where the thermostat should be set. And to some extent, there was also always the mystery of which thermostat controlled which part of the building, which was its own little, yeah. But, that was always something that was, sort of to the whims of fate. But now, I have the ability to control the temperature, which is something that you would never have thought of as a luxury, but it really is, especially, given the heat wave we went through this summer, and then the sudden cold spat that we found ourselves in at the start of the month. So all of those little factors, I just want to change something about the environment I'm working in. It's so much more flexible. The issue that I've had more trouble with, I think, is the work day seems to be less well defined. And so, when you started approximately, and then you get to a point in the afternoon where you're like, have I actually done 8 hours worth of work? And I think that's probably a little easier working as an instructor, because you have, set times for all of your classes. But there are occasions when I'm like, what did I do between 1:30 and 2 o'clock that counts as work?
Right.
And then you think, oh wait, yeah, I did do that. So the time somewhat loses meaning when you're not engaging with your coworkers during breaks, or having students come in. When I have a bunch of clients that I do consultations for, or I'm on the phone a lot, then it's really easy. But when I'm like just sitting there typing a document for hours on end, did 3 hours really go by? And, that was something that was always a little easier to do when you were going into the office, because you were like, I was here, and I certainly couldn't just zone out for 45 minutes. But when you're sort of accountable for your own time in this more removed way, it seems a little more problematic for time to just lose all cohesion.
Gotcha. Dream vacation spot.
I don't know. I like where I am right now. It just, if I could be right here and not have to worry about being somewhere in 3 hours, I'm perfectly happy. Well, because I'm sitting in front of my production computer, and I'm sitting in front of my production rig, and I have a whole bunch of projects that I could be working on, and the delivery apps are available, so I can get food. So I'm in a good spot.
Great segue into the next little segment I wanted to talk about. You are a content creator. Would you agree?
I suppose that's a fair descriptor of what I do.
Tell me, when you create content, what's your number one go-to technology or device?
I'm recording audio, then I'm using Reaper on a custom-built Windows desktop. Although I am rather covetously eyeing one of those new MacBooks.
What microphone, what's your signal chain you're using right now?
So we have an Electro Voice RE20, which is a large diaphragm dynamic microphone. And that is running into a Rolls mute mic switch because when we are recording for the podcast, I like to be able to mute, without too much fuss. So
you're not gating or anything?
No. So there's just a button that interrupts the signal. And then I have a Motu M4 audio interface, which is a really good intro level, I believe $230 MSRP audio interface.
Any issues with accessibility?
No, none at all.
Is it tactile? It's fairly tactile. You know what you're touching, and it's
yes, very much so.
Okay. How's it feel? It doesn't. Do the switches feel good on it? Does it have a solid feel?
Yes. It has one of the cool things about it is it actually does have a power switch, so you can power it off. The phantom power and direct monitoring are actually controllable per microphone input. And it has, I believe, 70 dB of microphone gain. It also has loopback functionality, which when this interface came out was a cutting edge feature, but now pretty much all of the modern audio interfaces that have rolled out since then have added it. Which loopback will allow you to record as separate channels what you are hearing from the computer, and can also provide what's referred to as a mix minus that will take everything except that audio and send it back up the chain to, say, Zoom. So your guests won't hear themselves talking, which is a nightmare for...
Especially if there's any latency.
Yes. Which, of course, there would be in that instance. Because you've sent it all the way down the chain and then back and then through the internet. And then, actually, I guess, then we're going into Reaper, which is my DAW choice on Windows. And the computer I'm using is actually one that Megan built. It's a Ryzen 7 with a, let's see, I believe we're running 64 gigs of RAM and a couple of SSDs.
Any control surfaces?
At present, I am not using a control surface. I'm experimenting with the BCF 2000, and actually, wait, there's an X-Touch MIDI on my desk, and I've been using that for some basic, track editing.
All right. Future plans. Where do you see yourself in the next year?
Well, in the next year, I hope to be doing more of the same work I'm doing right now. I currently am a tenant rights attorney, and that means that I work with folks who have issues with their landlords who are currently residential, primarily tenants, who are experiencing habitability issues or problems with their landlords that require advice on the best ways to handle their situation, whether that's communicating with the property management company or negotiating some kind of move-out agreement or potentially engaging in litigation. So I have the pleasure of working for an amazing law firm that is really proactive in developing the talents of their employees. So I think that I would like to stick around and see what good I can do.
You mentioned earlier that we kind of have to essentially prove ourselves, right? Do you feel that this working from home has changed that for us in the blind and low vision community?
I'm going to give you the lawyer answer, which is it depends. And I say that for a reason. When I started podcasting and everything as far as social media engagement was through text, it was common for people not to realize that I couldn't see. So it was often something that we had to have that I had to bring up when arranging for online games and the like, things that we just could not make work at the time. Uh, I think then that transitioning to remote work has done a great deal to even that playing field. If, and it's a big if, people's AT skills are up to uh, the challenge. And I think that ultimately that proves the value of the approach that Society for the Blind teaches of structured discovery and independent minded troubleshooting and problem solving. Because folks who learn by rote are not going to be able to adapt to the changing needs in this space. Whereas folks who were trained in place, who received on-site job training that now they may not be able to receive, depending on the circumstances, and learned exact steps for performing their work responsibilities when they're going to have to be logging in remotely or using a virtual machine or doing everything through a web portal, they are not going to have that same familiarity. And if they have not internalized that mentality of discovering and exploring what a given piece of hardware or software can do, then I think they will be at a disadvantage.
This leads to another question, and I know we're coming up on time, but do you think it would be valuable, say you're this huge company, and I don't want to say any names, but you're this huge company, and of course, you have an IT department and your own support. Do you think it would be advantageous to have someone on that team that is versed, in accessibility?
So I think that if you're a company that is sufficiently large, it really does make sense to invest in that sort of resource, especially if you are promoting diversity initiatives or that sort of mindset that promotes inclusive hiring. That if you want to broaden the backgrounds of your workforce at all levels, then you as an institution are going to need to invest some time, thought, and effort into ensuring that those team members are able to contribute in a meaningful way. Of course, that is where this all becomes really difficult. How much effort is required, what sort of resources are appropriate. And that's something that you have to really examine on your own and figure out for yourself. The important part is that you need to ask that question before you just decide, to put out, in public that I want to hire, 5, 10, 1,000 people with disabilities. What is that going to look like? How are you going to facilitate that? After they're hired, how do you retain them? As far as, looking into it from a employment angle, I would recommend that people pursue the certification in accessibility that has been established to set standards for what document accessibility and web accessibility are supposed to look like, and become well versed in WCAG and the various other industry standards for accessibility that are evolving, and obtain as much objective qualifications in those areas as possible. And I think that there are a lot of great resources online for that.
Okay. One last thing I would like you to talk about. We mentioned that you're a content creator. You mentioned your podcast earlier. Do you have any contact information or social media information or any podcasts you'd like to share that we can check you out?
So, let's see. You can find me on Twitter at Aser_Tolentino. And all of the podcasts we produce, you can find at redactedfilespodcast.com. redactedfiles.com. And that is a group of podcasts that deals with role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games. So it's a bit out of left field for anybody who knows me in a professional context, but it is something that on occasion is tangentially related to accessibility, because we do discuss accessibility in gaming from time to time in our interviews and the like. In fact, we just interviewed a creator who is running a Kickstarter project to add different layers to PDFs to improve their accessibility. So those would be the ways to find me online most easily.